Good afternoon, everybody. The doctor is in. It is 12:31 on this Friday afternoon. So glad many of you are joining us. And we're happy to be joined by Dr. Nancy Wood, who is one of the new pediatricians over at Children's Medical Group. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I say a new pediatrician. You've been practicing for years, but you joined Children's Medical Group just in September. So you're a new face around there.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so you are at the Providence office. Many people go to the Children's Medical Group, maybe at Airport and McGregor, but you also have an office at Providence. So just want to let people know if they want to see you as a patient, they can find you at the Providence office.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, we're happy to have you with us. And today we're talking about a topic that every parent can relate to, and that is stress. Adults feel stress, children feel stress as well. So we are going to talk about some of the signs of stress, how to prevent it, how to calm down your child. And I know many of you may have questions about the flu or COVID-19, and Dr. Wood is going to answer your questions about whatever you ask. So go ahead and type that question away. I've pulled up Facebook Live here on my phone, and I'll be asking those questions to her as you send them in to us. Okay, so let's start with stress. And we're going to talk about some of the symptoms. What are some of the things that, well, first of all, that may stress out a child?
Right, so children get stressed out by the exact same things that adults get stressed out by. Relationship problems, whether at home or at school. They feel like they might not be performing well at school or in their sports or after school activities. Oftentimes when they're overloaded with after school activities and they're tired, children get stressed out.
And sometimes they don't always articulate those things to a parent.
That's right. If you see your child and you wonder if they are stressed out, it's appropriate to ask them, you know, get down on their level and say, is something bothering you, or is there anything I can help you with?
And I know particularly with boys, sometimes you parents know they don't always tell you everything. I mean, I have a son and a daughter, and there's like night and day difference between what they'll tell me.
That's exactly right. So, you know, it really is child dependent, but some of those boys are really tight-lipped, and you have to create a really strong sense of trust between you and the child, and then ask the appropriate questions to the child to find out what's going on in their world.
And two, I think finding the right moments to do that. I know that the car always seems to be a good, they're trapped in there.
That's right.
That might be, do you suggest that to parents? Like find the right time to ask them what's going on, because if you catch them at 1 minute, they're not going to tell you, but if you catch them at another time, maybe right before bed, they'll tell you.
That's exactly right. It's fantastic to catch them in the car. Like you said, they're trapped. They don't have anywhere to go. You can turn the music down, and asking open-ended questions is also very helpful. So tell me what's going on. How was your day? Particularly for older children, that's better than a more directed question like, you seem upset, is something bothering you? They might be more willing to open up with an open-ended question.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's see if we're getting some questions. We're getting a compliment about you, someone who just loves you as a doctor.
Nice.
And we're going to be talking about stress, but this person, Amanda, wants to know, when we discussed this earlier off air, what is the best way to keep a newborn from contracting COVID-19?
Right. So even when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, I strongly recommend that all newborns be kind of cocooned. So you want to keep them away from most people until they've had their 2-month shots. There are very specific algorithms that say that we have to investigate any kind of fever in a child under 60 days old. With almost every single one gets hospitalized. So you want to protect them, you want to cocoon them, you want to really be, as I say in my clinic, a mama bear and a papa bear, and ask questions at the door, make sure that the people who are going to be around your small child are not sick.
Right, I know, because it will surprise you how many people will, oh, it's just a sniffle, and I'm going, okay, but my child's a baby.
Right.
You know,
right.
no, we're, right. Okay, let's see if we're getting some other questions. Let's talk before I answer this question, Jenny. I'm going to ask your question next, but let's go back to stress for a minute. Talk about how we know when stress really is concerning, because some children will end up having physical symptoms of stress.
Yes, so a lot of times children will complain about a headache or just kind of generally not feeling well, abdominal pain, and often those are signs of stress in a child. So to determine whether that's a sign of stress or something more serious, you might need to see your pediatrician. Certainly if the headache is associated with vision changes or vomiting, or if the abdominal pain is associated with vomiting or diarrhea or blood in the stool, those would be signs that it wasn't just stress, that perhaps something more was going on.
Because I think all parents feel like at some point a child has said, oh, my stomach hurts, and really they don't want to go to school, or they don't want to do something. So it is sometimes hard to tell the difference between a real problem, and not that stress isn't a real problem or something that's just upsetting them.
Right, so also looking for a change in activity. So if your child says, my tummy hurts, and then they go run outside and play with their friends for 3 hours, that's very different from my tummy hurts and I'm laying on the couch and I'm refusing to eat.
Right, absolutely. All right, Jenny, your question is, if someone has COVID, why do they want others who've been around them to get tested even though they may not have symptoms? And how soon does one test positive before any symptoms? So that's more of a generic COVID-19 question.
It's a great question, and the CDC has not really given us guidance as to exactly when a person should be tested if they're asymptomatic but they've been exposed. The general consensus is somewhere between 4 and 7 days. I've been telling people on the 5th day, if you're asymptomatic, that's probably the best day to be tested.
Okay.
However, if you've had a significant exposure, whether the test is positive or negative, you still must quarantine for the full 14 days because it can take up to 14 days for symptoms to present.
Right, okay. All right, let's see here. Another person, loving Dr. Wood. Let's see what other question we're getting here. I'm getting a list of all the people watching. We have quite a few people watching this afternoon, so we're going to continue to wait for people to ask us some more questions. So let's talk a little bit more about stress and how to prevent stress in children.
Right, so as we were saying earlier, adults really like free reign of their life. Children really thrive off of boundaries and rules and regulations and knowing what comes next. So it's really great to set your child up in the morning for a good day by telling them, we're going to be going to school and today is piano day, and after that we'll be coming home. And it's also very important to let them test the boundaries and
they'll do that.
That's right. And then show them where the limits are. They really appreciate that.
Right, and I think that's interesting about how children thrive off of routine, because I always feel like when my life gets a little bit crazy, and then my children's life becomes crazy because we're running around like crazy people, they don't do as well with that. So I try to keep their routine the kind of what it is, and I do try to tell them, like you said, are going to school, then we're going to do piano, and then you're going to do this, and then we're going to go to tennis, or kind of whatever it is. They need to know what is coming up, because that sort of unpredictability, I just don't think children do well with that.
They generally don't. And another thing is to schedule some sort of downtime during the day.
Yes.
They're young, they're growing, their brains need a little bit of a break. So while we're all very tempted to go straight from school to the next after school activity and then have dinner and then have bedtime, it's really important for them to have a little bit of downtime sometime during the day.
Right. And bedtime, that is huge. I know that even as adults, when we feel stressed, sometimes we wake up the next day, we feel a little bit better about whatever it was. How strict should parents be about bedtime?
That's another thing that's very child dependent. I think it's appropriate for everyone to have a set bedtime, and whether or not you let your child stay up past your bedtime, it's up to you.
Right.
But it's really nice for them to have a routine and to know what to expect with bedtime as well.
I know, we've always been kind of strict with the bedtime, but then we have other friends who are not, and I think sleep is number one, very, very important for children.
Definitely.
All right, so Brent is asking, is there a difference in positive stress and negative stress, such as stress from a new school or activity?
That's a fantastic question. So there definitely is. A lot of children will thrive off of a small amount of positive stress.
Okay.
If they're in a new situation and they find it exciting, that is helpful to them. More introverted children may not. That any kind of new situation may be disruptive to them. And you can tell by the child. Your child will let you know if they're stressed out. They will tell you, hopefully they'll tell you directly, this is good for me or this is bad for me. But often just by their actions, you'll know what's going on with your child.
And we were talking earlier about the importance kind of modeling. They do mimic what an adult does, what we do, and how we handle stress. So it's like you pray that you are giving your children good coping mechanisms so they can cope with things, once they grow up.
Absolutely. So it's very appropriate to let your child see you a little stressed out. Something doesn't go your way. You want to show them that it's okay, not everything always goes our way. This is how mom and dad like to deal with that, and this is probably a good way for you to deal with it. Now that's a little bit different from letting them see you super stressed out. So if there were a situation that were overwhelming for you, that might be better to go into your room and handle that on your own.
Right.
But a small amount of stress and letting your child see that conflict resolution, that's very appropriate and good for the child.
Right. Okay, so we've got a lot of people watching right now as we're talking about children and stress, and we've gotten a few questions about COVID-19. Let me ask you about, you said that you've been pretty busy lately in your new practice. Are you seeing many cases of COVID-19 in children?
You know, it's really interesting we're not. Actually, I've probably tested over 200 children at this point for COVID-19, and I've only had 4 test positive, which I'm very grateful for that. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop any moment.
Right,
I'm terrified that there's going to be this tremendous outbreak sometime soon. But as of now, the children seem to be protected from this.
And I wonder, and we were talking about, does it have something to do with the fact that they're all wearing masks in school? Is that offering some layer of protection?
I think that as parents, we often protect our children more than we protect ourselves. And I think the masks are helping, particularly when they're worn properly. And I also think that there are many, many theories out there as to why children are not contracting the illness in the same way that adults are, but I'm just really grateful that they're not.
What do you think, what are some of those theories? I'm just curious why.
Some of them are pretty technical, but others are not. So others are just that they're not at the same height as adults, or that their cells are not as sticky, so the virus is not getting into the cells as easily as it is in adults. One theory is that they are exposed to so many different coronaviruses as small children, not just the novel COVID-19 coronavirus, and so that they have a little bit of immunity in that way.
Are you seeing fewer patients come in with just your everyday run-of-the-mill cold or stomach bug because they're wearing masks? I'm just curious about that.
You know, I wish we were, but we're actually seeing probably the same number of fever, runny nose, cough, congestion.
So they're getting other things, they're just not spreading. And I was reading a national article the other day about how schools are not, and the title was "Schools Are Not Super Spreaders." And I guess when they've looked at, around the country, they're seeing kind of what you've just described, not a lot of children being diagnosed.
I know, fingers crossed for sure.
Okay, Rhonda is asking a question back to the topic of stress. Can children develop a nervous condition from stress?
Yes, I'm sure they could. That would probably be a really significant amount of stress that would cause a child to develop some sort of disorder or nervous condition from it. Certainly, if you feel that your child is having some sort of chronic problem from stress, it would be most appropriate to see their pediatrician.
Right. And do you ever recommend a counselor, like a child needs somebody regularly to talk to kind of work through this stress?
I think that everyone should talk to a counselor at some point. I think it's wonderful to have a third party who's not enmeshed in the situation that you're in your household or at your school. So definitely, we are very blessed in Mobile. We have wonderful counselors, and we have several who are fantastic with children.
Right, so if you think that your child is really stressed out and maybe does not deal with anxiety well, then maybe that would be something to consider. I know a lot of parents don't like the idea of, oh, my child is seeing a counselor, but it could only help, and to give them those skills now will benefit them when they're an adult.
Definitely. I mean, we can all do better at coping with stress. So just like you have to practice when you're playing baseball, or you have to practice when you're learning the violin, you have to practice when you're trying to deal with stress.
I know, because there are a lot of stressors these days. I mean, life is just more competitive for children, and not only in school, but in sports or even, ballet or dance. I mean, all these things that we kind of throw on them.
Yes.
We have to sometimes think, and then also to know, what about when you need to realize, okay, maybe they don't need to do that activity or that sport. It's too stressful for them, because I think sometimes we put on them what we want them to do.
Yes, hopefully your child will tell you, and it's very important to listen to them, to not brush them off and say, no, you're doing great at this, I want you to do it. A lot of times children, even the star athlete or the star ballerina, is tired of it, and you should respect that in your child and let them have a little bit of a break. And kind of back to the stress, I feel like we're all in an extra layer of stress because of the pandemic. I think it's creating this kind of stressful haze that we're all wading through all the time, and our children pick up on that.
Absolutely. Okay, this person, Leslie, is asking about the most appropriate way to cope with child tantrums. So she's talking about ages 1 to 3. And she says the best way for the child to understand frustration, still overcoming them in a positive way. So I guess, how do you help a young child deal with stress who's having tantrums?
So I think one very important thing to do is acknowledge that the child is stressed out, right? So say, I can see that you're very frustrated right now, and then trying to pin down what it is that's frustrating them. So if they can't communicate, it's probably best to ask them questions. Are you frustrated because your milk just spilled? Are you frustrated because your brother knocked over your tower? And then once you figure out what's causing the stress, that can guide how you handle the stress.
Right, and it can be hard for a parent whose children are having these temper tantrums because you want to raise your voice and just say, oh, stop it. But really, that's probably the worst thing you can do is lose your own temper in the course of their temper tantrum.
Exactly. You've got to keep your cool. I mean, that's your job as their parent, is to show them that you can remain calm, that things can be okay even when they're the most stressed out.
Right. Okay. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Wood, that I didn't touch on that you'd like for our viewers to know?
You know, just driving home that point, if you think there is something serious going on with your child, it's very important to take them to their doctor and to talk it through. We certainly wouldn't want anybody to write off something like a headache or abdominal pain, just chalk it up to stress. It's really a diagnosis of exclusion. So if there is something more serious, particularly if it's going on for days and days, take your child to the pediatrician.
All right. Well, Dr. Nancy Wood is a pediatrician with Children's Medical Group here in Mobile, and she is at the Providence Park office. Dr. Wood, thanks so much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Devin.
Appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for watching The Doctor Is In. I'm Devin Walsh. I'll see you tonight for WKRG News 5 at 5.